Your garden is incredible in July. Tomatoes coming in hot. Zucchini piling up faster than you can give it away. Beans by the basketful. And then, almost overnight, it is gone. First frost hits, and the whole thing shuts down like somebody flipped a switch. By November, the garden is brown stubble. By January, you are back in the produce aisle, squeezing pale tomatoes and pretending they taste like something, and you just accept it, because that is how gardening works, right? You grow in summer. You eat from the store the rest of the year. That is exactly what I believed for the first 20-some years of my gardening life. And I was dead wrong. Because about 60 miles from where I live, Amish families are walking out to their gardens in January and pulling fresh food from the ground. Not canned food, not frozen food. Fresh food, kale that got sweeter because of the cold. Carrots so crisp they snap when you bend them. Spinach leaves that came up under glass while the rest of us were flipping through seed catalogs and waiting for spring. When I first saw this with my own eyes, I could not believe I had spent decades letting my garden sit empty for 6 months of the year. Half the year, wasted. And the Amish were not doing anything exotic. They were not using greenhouses or heated growing systems. They were using simple tools, careful planning, and a way of thinking about the garden that most of us abandoned 2 generations ago. Let me take you back to the moment that changed how I garden. It was January, maybe 10 years ago. I was visiting an Amish family in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, for reasons unrelated to gardening. We were in the kitchen, and the woman of the house put out lunch. There was fresh coleslaw made from cabbage she had stored in the root cellar, pickled beets she had canned in August, bread and butter pickles from July cucumbers, and then she set down a bowl of fresh spinach salad. I looked at it and said, "Where did you get fresh spinach in January?" She pointed out the window toward the garden and said, "Same place I always get it." I walked outside with her husband after lunch, and there it was. A row of cold frames, maybe 6 of them, built from old storm windows and scrap lumber. He lifted a lid, and inside was spinach, perfect and green, like it was May. Next to it, a bed of mash, which is a cold, hardy salad green that most American gardeners have never heard of. Further down the row, under a thick blanket of straw, he dug up a handful of carrots and parsnips that had been in the ground since October. I had been gardening for 30 years at that point, and I felt like a beginner. Not because I lacked skill, but because I had never once considered that the garden could work this way. The Amish do not have a catchy name for this approach, but when I asked that farmer in Lancaster how he planned his garden, he used a phrase I have never forgotten. He called it Die Ordnung des Gartens, Die Ordnung des GAR10s, the order of the garden. In Amish life, Ordnung means the understood rules and rhythms that guide everything. In the garden, it means there is an order to what gets planted, when it gets planted, and what takes its place. Nothing is random. Every month has a job. Every bed has a schedule. And the calendar on the kitchen wall is just as important as the seeds in the shed. That is the mindset shift. Most of us garden by impulse. We plant when we feel like it in the spring, harvest what comes, and quit when it gets cold. The Amish garden by calendar. And that calendar runs 12 months, not 5. Let me show you exactly how they do it. The first thing you need to do is stop thinking of your garden as a summer project. This is the mental shift that unlocks everything else. The Amish divide their growing year into 4 distinct seasons, and each one has its own crops, its own tasks, and its own harvest. Spring is for cool weather greens, peas, radishes, and getting warm season transplants started. Summer is the main production season. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, corn, squash, and cucumbers. Fall is for a second wave of cool weather crops, plus the storage harvest, when potatoes, onions, and winter squash come out of the ground and go into long-term keeping. Winter is for cold frame greens, overwintered root crops, and eating from the root cellar and canning shelves. When you lay it out like that, you realize there is no off-season. There is no month where the garden has nothing to offer. But this only works if you plan for all 4 seasons before you plant the first seed. The Amish sit down in January or February and map out the entire year. What goes where? When it gets planted? When it gets harvested? What replaces it? That planning session is the single most important hour you will spend on your garden all year. If you are in zones 6 through 8, you have the widest window. Zones 4 and 5, your winter harvest will lean more on storage, crops and heavily mulched roots. But cold frames still extend your fresh greens well into December. This is where the Amish calendar earns its keep. Instead of planting all their lettuce at once, all their beans at once, all their beets at once, they stagger. A new sowing every 2 to 3 weeks for any crop that allows it. The result is not one giant glut followed by nothing. It is a steady, manageable stream of food arriving week after week for months, spring through fall. Beets every 3 weeks from April through July, plus a fall sowing in August. Bush beans every 2 to 3 weeks from mid-May through late July. Spinach in spring, then again in late summer for fall and winter harvest. Carrots sown in spring for summer eating and again in midsummer for fall harvest and winter storage. The Amish keep this organized with a wall calendar in the kitchen. Every 2 weeks, it tells them what to sow. There is no guesswork. There is no, I should probably plant something this weekend. It is written down, and they follow it. I started doing this myself about 8 years ago, and it was the single biggest improvement I have ever made in over 50 years of gardening. My harvest window went from roughly May through September to April through November, almost overnight, just from staggering what I was already growing. This is the step that most gardeners think is impossible, and I understand why. We have been told our whole lives that the garden is done after first frost. But the Amish prove every year that this is simply not true. With 2 simple, low-cost techniques, you can harvest fresh food well into winter, and in some zones, straight through it. The first technique is cold frames. A cold frame is a bottomless wooden box with a clear lid, usually an old storm window or a sheet of rigid polycarbonate. You set it over a garden bed, and it traps solar heat during the day and holds it through the night. The temperature inside runs 8 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than the outside air. That's enough to keep cold-hardy greens like spinach, kale, mache, claytonia, and arugula alive, and producing through temperatures that would kill them in the open garden. The key is what you plant under them, and when. You do not plant winter crops in winter. You plant them in late summer and early fall, August through mid-September in most zones, and let them establish while the days are still long enough for growth. Once the short days of November arrive, the plants mostly stop growing, but they stay alive and harvestable under the cold frame. You are not growing in winter. You are harvesting in winter what you grew in fall. That distinction matters, because it means the plants need to be nearly full size before the cold really sets in. Time your sowing accordingly. In Zone 6, sow cold frame crops by early September. In Zone 5, aim for late August. In Zones 7 and 8, you have until late September or even early October. The second technique is deep mulch storage right in the ground. The Amish pile 8 to 12 inches of straw over late-season root crops, carrots, parsnips, beets, and turnips, and leave them in the garden all winter. The mulch insulates the soil and prevents it from freezing solid. When they need carrots in January, they walk out, pull back the straw, and dig. Fresh, crisp. Often sweeter than summer carrots because the cold converts starches to sugar. I've done this in Zone 6 with parsnips, and I was still pulling them in late February. The flavor was extraordinary. If you have never tasted a frost-sweetened parsnip, you owe it to yourself to try this. Not everything can stay in the garden or under a cold frame. Some crops need to come inside. And this is where the Amish root cellar comes in. Now, before you say, "I do not have a root cellar," let me tell you that you probably have something close enough. An unheated garage, a cool basement corner, a crawl space, even an insulated box on a north-facing porch. What you need are temperatures between 32 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit and moderate humidity. That is all. The crops that store longest in these conditions are the ones the Amish grow specifically for winter keeping. Storage. Onions, not sweet onions, but hard-necked storage varieties like Copra or Patterson, will keep 5 to 7 months in a cool, dry space. Potatoes stored in darkness at about 40 degrees last 4 to 6 months easily. Winter squash like butternut, Hubbard, and blue curry keep 3 to 5 months at 50 to 55 degrees. Garlic braided and hung in a cool room lasts 6 to 8 months. Cabbages stored whole in a root cellar with the outer leaves intact will keep 2 to 3 months. The Amish also cure these crops properly before storage, and this step is critical. Onions and garlic get laid out in a dry, shaded area for 2 to 3 weeks after harvest until the necks are papery and fully closed. Potatoes cure in a dark spot at about 60 degrees for 10 days to toughen the skins. Winter squash cures in a warm room for about 10 days to harden the rind. Skip the curing step and your storage life drops dramatically. Do it properly and you are eating homegrown food in March, without ever opening a canning jar. Between canned goods from summer, root cellar storage, deep mulched roots in the garden, and cold frame greens, the Amish have covered every month. There is no gap. No month where the family depends on a grocery store for vegetables. And none of it required electricity, special equipment, or anything beyond careful planning and simple, proven techniques. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like when all 4 steps come together. In January and February, you are harvesting spinach, mâche, and kale from your cold frames, pulling carrots and parsnips from under the straw mulch, and eating stored potatoes, onions, squash, and canned goods from the pantry. In March, the cold frame greens are growing again as the days lengthen, and you are starting your first outdoor sowings of peas and radishes. In April and May, the spring garden is producing radishes, lettuce, spinach, and peas while you transplant summer crops. June through September is the main abundance: tomatoes, beans, peppers, corn, cucumbers, and squash, and you are canning, drying, and storing the surplus as fast as it comes in. In October, you are harvesting the storage crops, curing onions and squash, planting garlic for next year, and tucking straw over your overwintering roots. In November and December, you shift to cold frame harvests and root cellar meals. And the cycle starts again. No month empty. No month without something fresh or home preserved on the table. That is not a fantasy. That is what the Amish do. And it is what I have been doing for the last 8 years since I learned their system. I will be straight with you. Year 1, you are not going to have a seamless 12-month harvest. Start with 1 new season. If you have always been a summer-only gardener, add a fall planting and 1 or 2 cold frames. That alone will extend your harvest by 2 to 3 months and change how you think about the garden entirely. By year 2, add storage, crops in a proper curing routine. By year 3, you will have the full calendar running. The families I have worked with who committed to this system tell me they cut their winter produce spending by 70 to 80% by the 3rd year. That is not a guarantee, but it is a realistic target if you follow the calendar and do the work. Here's the truth that Amish farmer in Lancaster handed me on a cold January afternoon. The garden does not have to end in September. It never did. We just stopped asking it to keep going. The ground is willing to feed you 12 months a year if you plan for 12 months. Plant for 12 months, and use simple tools to bridge the cold. You do not need an Amish farm. You do not need a real root cellar. You need a calendar, some cold frames built from scrap wood, a bag of straw mulch, and the willingness to think about your garden differently. Pick one step. Build one cold frame this fall. Sow one bed of spinach in September. Mulch one row of carrots and leave them in the ground past frost. Just one step. And when you walk out in December and pick something fresh from your own garden for the first time, you will understand exactly what I felt standing in that Amish garden 10 years ago. Come back and tell me about it. I read every single comment. This is Ronald Beckett. Happy gardening, and I will see you in the next one.